Hello, welcome to SQL in the City Streamed. I'm going to talk to you for about the next hour about which metrics you should be monitoring if you're responsible for 1, 100, 1,000 SQL servers. My name's Kathi Kellenberger. I'm the editor of Simple Talk, the online technical journal for Redgate. You can find me at auntkathysql.com. That's my personal blog. You can email me at my Redgate email address or find me on Twitter at AuntKathi. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. If you're watching this presentation, you probably already have quite a few good reasons to monitor SQL Server. You probably have some things in mind already. And I'm wondering if this has ever happened to you. Have you ever been away from your desk, maybe for lunch, and when you get back, you find out there was some bad thing that happened and they went ahead and restarted your SQL Server and now they expect you to figure out what was wrong? Guess what? A lot of the information that could have helped you solve the problem has now been eliminated because a lot of that metadata starts over with the restart. So by monitoring SQL Server, we're going to understand what that bad thing is that's happening right now or that just happened. And instead of scrambling for some queries to run and just stumbling around trying to figure out what's going on, wouldn't it be great to just go to one screen and be able to see everything that's happening? And another really great thing would be able to know what bad things are happening before the phone rings. And I bet you rarely get a phone call with someone saying, hey, the application is running great today. That SQL Server must be performing well. No, you get the opposite call. So wouldn't it be great if you were on top of that and were able to know about those things and start troubleshooting before anybody else even knew about it? Wouldn't that be great? Monitoring SQL Server will really be helpful for predicting problems. For example, knowing that maybe a database file is starting to fill up, and whenever it has to grow, it's going to grow, and that's going to be in the middle of a transaction. It's going to slow things down. That's one of the things I hate. Really like to stay on top of that and know when those files need to grow, and then take care of it during an off time. In my opinion, performance is about job 4 for a DBA. There's a lot of other things that are more important, but then to your customers, your end users, performance is the thing they think of first. So even though security and high availability, business continuity, those things are really more important, good performance is really, really important. And by monitoring SQL Server, we can make the performance better because we'll know where to work, where to look. It's also really important for resource planning. So imagine that you're going to need to create a new VM for a SQL Server or possibly even order hardware. And you've got to understand how that SQL Server has been using resources over time so that you can plan for that next server. So when I think about what to monitor, in my mind, I think of it as like this triangle here that kind of filters down. At the top, I think of the server. Now, with the Windows server, there are certain things that we're going to look at, no matter if it's a web server or an application server or a SQL server or any kind of Windows server. We're going to be looking at certain metrics, no matter what that server's job is. We drill down to the SQL Server instance level, and at that level, there are very specific metrics that we can look at as far as SQL Server and settings that we need to care about at that level. Drilling down a bit more, we can look at the databases. Are there settings that are causing performance issues? Is maintenance being done? There's a lot of things we need to pay attention at that level. And finally, we get down to this very granular query level. And I'm not going to suggest that we pay attention to every query that's running on the server. However, there are some queries that are more likely to cause performance issues than others, and we need to find those. So by using monitoring, we can actually figure out what those queries are. Here's the interesting thing. Any problems at the query and database level, for example, a query that is now doing a clustered index scan on a big table, or maybe a database that's set to auto shrink or set to auto close, even worse. Things like that are going to be seen higher up the stack. Problems at that query level are going to be measurable at the server and instance level. So at the server level, first of all, we need to make sure that the server is running. If the server is off, nobody's going to get any work done. And we need to make sure we're aware of if for some reason it did go offline. We need to pay attention to errors such as security and application errors. And the physical resources we are going to pay attention to are the CPU utilization, I/O, and memory. And I'm not giving you specific metrics to pay attention to because guess what? There's a bunch of them for each one of these areas. And those three physical metrics are very, very important. So you're going to see me mention those over and over throughout this session. At the instance level, again, I want to make sure that the SQL Server is running and is reachable. Has there been a cluster? Is it clustered? Is it set up with failover clustering? Has there been a failover? We need to know about that, obviously. We're going to pay attention to errors and alerts. And again, we're going to look at the physical resources and the things going on with that server. We're going to pay attention to memory. We're going to pay attention to things like blocking. We're going to pay attention to the workload. Has it increased over time? Or do we have more user connections than we used to? Are we using, do we have more transactions per second than before? Probably one of the most important things to look at the instance level is the weights. And hopefully you're familiar with that. If not, the weights are going to tell you what the queries are waiting on, and it can help you pinpoint the bottleneck in your server. Now, just knowing what the weights are, that's not going to give you the exact answer. You're going to have to do some research because sometimes you might see a problem. Let's say that I/O looks like a problem, but you've only got 4 gigabytes of RAM assigned to that server, or vice versa. Sometimes one problem looks like something else when you're working with weights. So it is one of the most important things to look at the instance level, but you need to do some research. At the database level, again, we have to make sure that the database is online. Or if it's an availability group, has that availability group failed over? Has the queue gotten behind in that AG group? We want to make sure that our databases are backed up according to the particular schedule. Really, really important. And is other maintenance being done, such as indexing? We're going to pay attention to that database growth as well, so we can make sure we size our files correctly and also understand if over time that database is getting so busy that maybe we need to move it on its own SQL Server. I know when I was a DBA, I had a big project of consolidating a bunch of SQL servers and putting multiple databases where previously there was just one on a lot of servers. Maybe a particular database is just too busy to be consolidated like that, and we need to watch for that. That's the workload. All right, so at the query level, one of the things to pay attention to is the queries that run most frequently. Of course, those might not be the worst performing, but since they run so frequently, they're still going to have a pretty big impact. The next couple of things that I like to look at are the queries that use the most I/O, the most logical reads, and the longest running queries. And often if I go out and try to find like the top 10 and sort those different ways, I end up seeing a lot of overlap. Those queries that use a lot of I/O are also the ones that take the longest to run. Another thing to think about are queries that are just important in your organization. Maybe it's a process that runs over an hour every month, and that's what we expect. If for some reason it starts creeping, taking longer. 1 month it's an hour and a half, and then 2 hours, and it's going to start affecting other processes along the line. We need to pay attention to that. So monitoring is not going to help us find the important queries, but we can pay attention to if it changes over time, if their performance changes over time. All tied in with this is index tuning. Monitoring doesn't monitoring can kind of appraise you of whether some indexes are not being used or not. You can check for that. But in general, once we start working at this level, this is where, to solve the problems, most of your work is going to be done. This is where most of the effort is going to be. And query tuning and index tuning just go hand in hand. So with monitoring, hopefully we have a history and we can look at that past behavior. We want to know what happened an hour ago, some bad thing happened, or yesterday, or last month. So, it's hard to go back and try to figure out what happened unless we have that monitoring, unless we're saving that information over time, saving that history. Another thing that's really important is to keep a baseline. If someone calls me and says, everything seems slower today, if I don't have a baseline, how can I really know? Maybe the SQL Server is performing more slowly, and I can compare today's performance with how it performed a week ago on the same day. Maybe this might even help me show that there's some network issue and it's not necessarily related to the SQL Server, but I'm not really going to know that unless I can compare to how it looked before. I can also look at trends, and I see this as just keeping on top of how resources are being used. Am I going to need to increase resources, or will we need additional storage space? And the old adage is true: those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So hopefully with past history, we can predict what's going to happen later. We're going to use those trends, and we can see every month this database is increasing by 10 gigabytes. Well, we can use that information to plan. Again, tracking growth over time, just like I said. So as far as storage, as far as CPU utilization, memory utilization, over time, those may increase. Another thing that predicting future behavior is going to help you with is communicating with the business. So let's say that you just figured out that your virtual machine is not going to last much longer without additional resources, maybe another month, and you go to your boss and say, I need to get a new VM because this one is just not going to work anymore. It would have been much better if you had known this 6 months ago when they were planning the budgets. And if you were able to communicate with the business because you understood the trends and being able to predict the future behavior, that's going to help you get that server a lot easier than if you just wait until the last minute. It also helps you understand how the business works. So hopefully if you're a database administrator at a company, you understand that business. If not, I suggest you start learning about that business. But one thing that monitoring SQL Server can do along these lines is to help you see trends. Is this business busier in the summer? Is it busier over the holiday season? I've talked about a lot of different areas to monitor and a lot of reasons to monitor. So what tools do we have to do this? There are quite a few tools that come right with SQL Server or with the Windows Server that are free to use. One of the most common is perfmon. So with perfmon, I can measure metrics at the server and the instance level, possibly even at the database level, but I haven't tried that. And you can either bring up perfmon to look at something that's going on right now, Or you can set up collections. So I've set up a ton of perfmon collections, 24-hour perfmon collections to be exact, over the past few years because I've done a lot of SQL Server health checks where I've just come in and helped them solve a problem, and then they may or may not need me later on. What I ended up having to do is take that file, usually pretty large file, and I had to convert it. It's a binary log file, and there's a command line tool called relog that I can use to extract that out into a CSV. Or I also like to use the PAL tool as well that you can get out on GitHub. So for what I was doing, that was really not that bad. It was just a one-time shot, or maybe we would make the corrections on the SQL Server and then do another comparison after those were done to see the improvement. The problem is, if I want to set this up so that I run it on a periodic basis so I get a history, well, I better get the PowerShell scripts out because I'm gonna need to set this up and figure out how to extract it, and then I'm probably gonna import that data somewhere. And here's the other thing. If I'm doing these, let's say I decide to do collections every so many hours, well, now that data is behind before it gets to that database that I've set up for monitoring. So it's a really wonderful tool, but and there's maybe some other ways to work with it that I'm not familiar with, but in general, you're gonna do some work. There is a tool called Trace, and there's also a GUI version of it called Profiler that DBAs around the world love to use. However, here's the bad thing. It's deprecated. And with Trace or the GUI Profiler, what you can do is record things that happen on the SQL Server. For example, errors that happen or queries that take over 30 seconds to run, things like that. Again, you've got to figure out what to do with these files and then import them, and it's a lot of work. As I mentioned, it's deprecated. We need to move off of it, and it's been not necessarily replaced yet, but the replacement for it is called extended events. Extended events is much more powerful. It has a much smaller impact performance-wise on the server, but the files that it creates are in XML. I'm not great at XML, and I keep telling myself that I'm never touching Trace or Profiler again, but then I end up working on a SQL 2008 R2 or 2008 and go back to it, and so it's got a learning curve. And like I said, you've got to be kind of good in XML. Again, you can do probably even more than you can with Trace, and it's a much better tool. A lot of folks are just kind of slow to adopt it. My favorite in this list are the DMVs and system views. DMV stands for Dynamic Management View. It also includes objects such as functions. And you can use these, you can have to write some queries and combine them together to get a lot of information about what's going on your SQL Server. Some of them are cumulative, some of them tell you what's going on right now, but a lot of them also clear out if you restart the SQL Server. One of the advantages of using the DMVs is that you're already in SQL Server. You don't have to figure out some way to get the data into SQL. It's pretty easy to work with once it's there. The Query Store is a tool that has been available since SQL Server 2016. Query Store you have to turn it on, you have to enable it for a particular database, but Query Store allows you to accumulate the queries and the execution plans that have run on your server. And it's pretty cool because you can follow the trends. Maybe a query all of a sudden begins to perform worse. It probably has a different plan. Maybe an index is now gone, or maybe the data has changed. So SQL Server has decided to use a different plan. So you can see that, and you can also force a particular plan as well. Again, this is available with SQL Server 2016. And one of the really great advantages is if you use this and restart SQL Server, that information is not cleared out as if you were looking in the plan cache. That's going to be gone once you restart SQL Server. So all of these tools will pull information from different areas. Okay, so and the format, the information that you get is different. So you can use these, you can do this. You can build, pull all this information into your own data warehouse, not your work data warehouse, but your own personal DBA data warehouse. And then once you have that information, how do you keep it current, up to date? And then the next thing is, guess what? You're going to have to create reports, some kind of interface that you can easily go and look at it. You know what? You'll probably be spending all your time working on this tool. A lot of it is reusable. If I have one SQL Server, I can apply that to maybe 100 or even 1,000 SQL servers. But wait, no, I can't, because guess what? We're running different versions, and some of these things that we do will not work depending on which version of SQL Server we're doing. So you'll end up spending a lot of time, if you do this right, you'll end up spending a lot of time getting this tool correctly, and you won't have the time to actually solve the problems. But I have a solution for you. There are companies that make third-party tools that will do the monitoring for you, that will pull that information from all these places and give you nice dashboards to look at. Yeah, I know what you're saying, they cost money, but guess how much money your company will be spending if you build this in-house monitoring tool yourself. They're going to be spending a lot more money on your salary where you could have been using your time in other ways, such as looking into database DevOps or other projects in your environment. So I'm really happy to tell you that Redgate has a wonderful tool called SQL Monitor. And I'm going to demonstrate that tool for you today. The first thing I want to do is show you a couple of dashboards. One's internal that I can't let you have, but one of them is public that you can get to. This particular dashboard you can get to by just going to monitor.red-gate.com. And you can play with it. You're not going to hurt anything. And it's actually looking at real servers that we have. For example, the SQL Server Central server right here. The first thing I want to show you is that there are multiple instances. Each one is represented by a tile, and they give you a lot of information up front. If there is something very critical happening, you'll see red with this little stop sign. If there's some warnings that aren't quite as critical, you'll see yellow with the caution sign. And if everything is going great, you will see healthy in green. Other thing that I can show you right here is I can just hover over some of these areas. Like here, I can see the rate of waits that are happening on the server. So if I see that going up, that could be a problem. I should know what's typical for that server. I can see the CPU utilization and also the disk I/O, the megabytes per second. So if I, from right in, let's see if I can do this. I'm just going to try to clear these alerts and just show you how this sorts itself dynamically. And I clicked the wrong thing. I just want to see if I can clear out the alerts and get it to, I got it the earlier time when I did this, I got it to move around. So if you'll notice that these red servers are over here on the left, that's because by default it sorts by the most critical first. I never got that guy to turn green, and maybe he will at some point. If I'm just interested in looking at the most critical problems, I can just filter by checking this box, and all the critical servers show up first. I can also do that with warning and with healthy. You may notice that there are some groups over to the side, so we always have to assign groups to a group to the server. And there's some by default, but in this case, we came up with our own. So let me go and switch over to another dashboard that's got quite a few more. This one's internal. It's actually a demo machine, but it is internal. You can see we've got a lot of servers that we're monitoring. And I've got so many that I can't see them all. And I'm going to display as small tiles. And I just got a message that on the public monitoring site, we can't clear those warnings out. So that's why it didn't help. I didn't realize that. So I wonder if I can, oops, that one just turned. Oh, you saw that happen. I didn't clear it out. The warning just cleared out itself and it flipped very quickly. Hopefully you saw that. I can order them by severity or by name. I can even give them an alias if I want a particular server to have a nickname. Over on the right, you see the important alerts. You can modify this. Let's say you just went out to lunch and you want to look at what has happened in the last hour. You can also filter by whichever group you'd like to look at. And in general, there's quite a bit of information you can see just on this dashboard. I'm going to switch over to my own little demo machine. I've got 2 instances running here. And what I'm going to do is just click right on the tile and go to the overview. And once I do, I can see over time those 4 things I told you were really important: CPU, memory, I/O, and weights. So just by default, I get this nice little graph that shows me what's going on. There's also a little window here, and wherever the window is positioned, that's what's going to control what you see on the rest of the page. So I'm going to drag this over, and I'm going to make sure I pull in some interesting things. And this is just a little demo machine that I have. So I have made some bad things happen, I have to confess. I wrote some PowerShell scripts to make a few bad things happen. So once I do this, the alerts update, and I'll scroll down on this page in just a bit. But I also want to show you, before I do that, that there's some little dots at the bottom. Every time an alert happens, it marks that at the bottom of the timeline. So I can see there was a deadlock. I can see that the database file increased, and that SSAS status, that actually means SQL Server agent status. All right, so once I do that, if I'm really interested in just one thing, I can clear out the others. So maybe I'm just interested in weights, and it would be easier for me to look at it like this. I can also click baseline, and it'll show me a baseline and offhand, I think it's of the previous 24 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. And as I do, you'll see some important metrics come up. First, we're going to look at the server level. So at the server level, we're looking at CPU, we're looking at memory, disk I/O, and we're also looking at weights. And weights are really part of the instance, but this is actually where it shows up. Once I scroll down a bit more, I see something that's near and dear to my heart, those top 10 queries. I can sort by time, I can sort by duration or by logical reads, and I'm seeing that same query show up again and again. I was actually doing an update on about 10 million rows, so that's what caused my problems. If I click on this, I get more information. I get the whole query here, and if I scroll down, this is really amazing. I get all of the weights that were involved with that query. I love that. I also can view the query plan. Just by clicking that, the query plan comes up. And don't worry, it's not going to be as difficult to read as it is in Management Studio. I have some information about the most expensive operations, and here I have some information about the most data-heavy operations. If I go and want more information about this particular object, and I click Output, I can find out exactly what was involved. I can click on Properties, and let me see if I can scroll over here and find out more information about that particular operator. So this is pretty cool. So has this ever happened to you? You get a call and they say that the application is really slow when I click this button, and you know what the query is running under it. And so you go ahead and take that query and run it in Management Studio, and it runs fine. And it's like you don't know whether to believe them or not. Well, you know what? Chances are you're getting a completely different plan than the plan that the end user got. But by using this, you're able to very easily pull out the exact plan that was used. So I really love this. I also have top 10 weights. You know what? Looking for weights is probably one of the queries I run almost every day whenever I'm working on servers. So I have some information, like for example, write log or page IO lash. I've got a little description of what those are, and I can tell how much time is spent on each one. Here's the really cool thing. If I click on that, I find out the queries that were affected by that weight type. That's really amazing. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. And here I've got a description, a much better description, not just a sentence, about what this weight means. When I scroll down, it tells me other things to look at. And let's see, where did it go? I'm scrolling on the wrong part. There we go. I accidentally closed it up. And some help to get you started in solving the problem. So I think this is really, really great, because not only does it give you what the problem is, it's going to help get you started along the right path to solving it. I think that's amazing. So if I scroll down even further, I'll start to see SQL Server metrics. For example, page splits, compilations, full scans. A lot of things that I really, really need to pay attention to as far as the workload. Here's more information. Page life expectancy, that's one of my favorites. I have run into this in my consulting work, where I run across these SQL servers that have they have pretty large databases, maybe 100 gigabytes, that's not really large, moderate databases that have maybe 100 gigabytes, and they're running on servers that are 6 gigabytes or 10 gigabytes, and they wonder why things don't work, and they have a page life expectancy of under, under 20. So this is one of my metrics that I like to pay attention to. It could mean one of two things, if you get a low page life expectancy. Either number one, like in my customer situation, they really didn't have enough RAM on the server. Or number two, maybe there's some queries that are doing full clustered index scans on some really big tables. So it's one of my favorites to look at. There's some other metrics, average CPU length, memory pages per second, are we paging? And the disk usage. Yeah, so paying attention to how well the disks are performing and how much space they take up. This is my little demo machine. I've just got a C drive. But again, it's a demo. Here's something really cool, blocking processes. And I want to point out one thing. Over here on the side, I could jump directly to any of these areas. I'm scrolling down, but there are little shortcuts here. If I click on this blocking process, how often have you been told there's something wrong with the SQL Server, and you can't figure out what that head blocker is, the one that's causing all the problems. So this gives you a really nice little diagram. And in this case, the head blocker was number 67, and there were some other SPIDs blocked behind it. So if for some reason, if this was going on right now, you could go ahead and kill that process if you wanted to. So there's, the error log. There's one more thing I want to show you here is the databases. So it shows you the size, the transaction per second. So we can pay attention to this to understand if that database is getting more transactions per second over time or if it's growing. So the next thing I want to do is switch over to the alerts page. And I've got a few alerts that I actually caused to happen. And we can filter these different ways if we would like to. TempDB is one of the biggest problems I see among a lot of my customers where it's not configured properly at all. So how do you know if you're having problems with TempDB? Well, one way is to pay attention to TempDB contention, and we test for that. If I click on this, it will give me more information. It'll show me everything that was going on the server at that time, including the top queries. So there may be a query that was causing a problem. And I can look at all those graphs that I saw on the overview page, just basically when that problem existed. If I scroll down, not scroll down, but if I click this description tab, I get information about what this means. And I think this is invaluable. Really what this problem means and a start on how to solve it. Let's go ahead and look and see if there are any other alerts that look interesting. It told me, now when I installed this tool, this is where I was first impressed. I installed the tool not too long ago, and within 5 minutes from the time I downloaded it, I started seeing alerts about problems with my SQL Server. And one of them was that my SQL Server agent wasn't running. So I was just really excited that it worked so quickly. I didn't have to configure a thing. I could have gone in and configured the email notification. I hadn't even done that, but just looking at the tool, I was already seeing alerts. We looked at the blocking process already. This is kind of cool, the database file usage. So let's take a look at that. So if I look at this, I can see a dotted line. Now again, this server hasn't been running for very long, but you might want to look at this over a month or so. It's giving me this little trend line of how the database will grow if it continues along the same rate. And there's a nice little message up here that's telling me increase the database file size to 215 gigabytes to allow for 1 year of growth. So I think that's pretty amazing. I can look at that maybe after a month or so. I wouldn't want to go by after a couple of days, but after a month or so, I can take a look at that and maybe resize those files, whenever the server's not busy. Again, on just about every screen, I'm going to see that performance data, whatever in the top queries, whatever was going on at that time. And if I click the description, I'll get information about what it means and what to do about it. Monitor is not going to solve your problems for you, but it's certainly going to give you a head start on how to solve them. I really love it. I haven't been working with it that long, but I'm just so impressed at how easy it is to use. And every time I learn something new about it, I'm just so excited. Let's see if there's anything. Oh, deadlocks. Now, if you have had to deal with deadlocks, you probably know how difficult it is to work with that deadlock graph that you get out of Extended Events or Profiler. And the funny thing about deadlock is it just sounds so creepy. The deadlock victim. You have been chosen as a deadlock victim. The other thing that's really a misconception about deadlocks is that people often think that if there's a really terrible, long-lasting blocking situation on the server, once blocking gets really bad, they start calling it a deadlock. And that's not true at all, because a deadlock is a situation kind of where often where a couple of updates or queries are in reverse order. So two different SPIDs are trying to access the same resources but in a different order. There's some other reasons for deadlocks, but that's a pretty common one. And SQL Server understands that it's not resolvable, so SQL will go ahead and decide which process is easier to roll back and kill that process. And that happens within 5 seconds. So a deadlock is not going to last 10 minutes or anything like that, just a few seconds, 5 seconds at the most. So if I click on one of the SPIDs, I can see exactly what was running at that time. So I get a lot of really great information. In this case, it looks like there were 2 SPIDs involved, and my membership table was getting updated. Again, if we look on the description, we'll get lots of information about deadlocks and tips on how to avoid them. They're not going to avoid them 100% of the time, but there are ways that we can at least cut down on their frequency. I'm going to switch over to the Analysis tab. And on the Analysis tab, it looks a little bit like that first overview page I showed you, because there's a chart at the top. And by default, it shows machine processor time. And if I scroll down a little bit, again, it's going to explain what that metric means. I love this. And also give you some statistics. During this time, the maximum was 38%. I can also add any other metrics, anything else that this tool is monitoring. I can go ahead and add that. So I'm going to go look for page life expectancy, which is under database metrics. And I'm not seeing it, but I know it's there. There it is. So I can add additional metrics. So in this case, I'm seeing that, so I've got 2 instances. It looks a bit strange because once I did that, that's a SQL Server metric, so I actually have 2 different servers that I'm looking at. So I can switch back and forth and get the information here. The blue line is down here very low. The other instance is doing nothing, so it's gradually increasing over time. So I mentioned that you're going to want to look at this data over a long period of time. And you may be thinking, oh, wait a minute, how gigantic is this database that's storing this information going to grow? Well, we do automatically purge, and I believe it's after a couple of months. And you can go in and modify that if you would like to. But what I recommend is that every once in a while, you figure out which metrics you would like to save over time, and go ahead and click this Export to CSV. And then even after the purge, you can go back and get that information if you would like to see it. So I really think this is great, and I can also click here and easily look over different time periods. What I love about this tool is it's just so simple to use. Here's another cool thing. I'm going to clear out the metrics except for the CPU. There we go. And what I'm going to do is show you how you can compare over time how things change. So you have to pick a time range. This server hasn't been running that long, so I'm just going to stick with 1 hour. And then I'm going to compare a baseline to 1 hour earlier. I don't know if you can see it because there's another line that's very lightly blue here. If I extend the baseline, I can get up to 10 additional time periods. It may not be that easy for you to see, but if I click this Regions button, now I'll start to see the trends over time. And for example, something is going on Wednesday afternoon. I could use this to compare to a week ago and see if that happens every Wednesday. Is this typical of Wednesday afternoon? So I think this is really, really a good thing. So we also have some reports. So automatically baked in, we have reports, and the way that they work are, you'll see for whichever tile shows up, you'll see the, if it's running against more than 5, you'll see the top 5 for that particular area. So I'm only monitoring 2 instances. So I've got the instances with the lowest uptime, the fastest filling disks, and here's a really cool thing. If I hover over this, it shows me at the current rate of use how many days I have left before that drive fills up. That's pretty cool. I have the longest running queries, and you don't automatically get page life expectancy, but I decided to add it. And the way you add it is you just click Add Tile, and you give it a name, and then you can just choose any metric in the list. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And of course, you can make your own reports. You can look at a particular server group or a particular server, or do whatever you like. And you can print these and actually save as a PDF, edit the report, copy it, whatever you'd like to do. So I think that works well. You might be wondering about the configuration. How easy is it? How much time do you have to spend working with this to get started? And really, I only spent like 5 minutes, and all it was installing it, telling it where I wanted the repository to go, and which SQL Server I wanted to monitor. And it was just like that. And then later, I installed a second instance, and it automatically picked up that second instance. I didn't really have to do a thing. So I'm going to show you the configuration. You're probably most interested in alerts. When you, out of the box, a lot of alerts are already set up for you as far as notification on the screen. You'll have to go in and set up if you want those to go to pagers, if you want them to go to emails, if you want them to go to Slack, where you want those alerts to go. And you have quite a few choices. If I want to change one of them, so let's say that I want to configure this particular alert, I click on it, and then I can change it. Maybe I want an alert that's, I want it to go to high instead of medium, and I wanted to, instead of 1 gigabyte, I'd like it to be a half a gigabyte. You know, whatever I would like to do, and only for, it didn't let me do that, because it has to be whole numbers. And I can change the how long that has to last before I change it. I can change and have multiple alert thresholds, so maybe it's high if it's 1 gigabyte, and medium if it's 10 gigabytes, for example. So I can do things like that. I want to, put some thought into this, because I want to make sure that I'm not overloading my staff with all these messages, because eventually they're going to start to ignore them if they're getting too many. So let's take a look at some of the things that we do measure. So a lot of them, like processor utilization, is there a backup overdue? This is really, really important. Are those backups being done? I've been to customers, generally they don't have a DBA where they have a backup job in place, but it's never been scheduled. So they think they're getting backups, but they're not. A cluster failover, all kinds of information, a job failing. Guess what? We monitor availability groups. So if on the page that you can look at, it looks pretty much like the one you get in Management Studio. But guess what? We go one step better. We can automatically notify you in case of a failover, or in case that there's a problem, with the secondary keeping up, the replication failing behind. So that's pretty cool. There's one more cool thing here for me to show you, and that's our custom alerts. If there's something here that you care about that's not part of it, if you can write a query to measure that thing, you can add it as a custom alert. So here's one that I added, database auto growth. I said if the database grows, automatically make that a high alert. You may not want to do that, but I just was playing around with this just to see what happens. So how do you set these up? You know what? It's really not that difficult. I'm gonna, let's see. I've only done it just to play around, and I'm gonna go back to configuration and go to custom metrics. And here's where you create your custom metric. But guess what? We have this really great program called Friends of Redgate, and a lot of them have come up with metrics that they thought were important. And if you want to get those, all you have to do is click here and go to a page where we've saved those from all of our friends. And for example, let's say I want to find out if there's any custom metrics about TempDB. I can search for that, and there's several of them. So all I have to do is click that, click Install the metric, and tweak it if I need to, specify where I want it to go, test it, and then enable it if I would like. Make sure you test it first. And that's all there is to it. It's just really, really awesome. We also monitor virtual machines. So I'm going to switch here. I don't have one to show you live, but I have a screenshot of VMware monitoring. So notice down here in the CPU graph, there's a line down here for SQL, and there's one for the machine. There's a dotted line here for the VM host. So if you decide you want to monitor your actual VM host, you go ahead and enable that, and it just kind of overlays into the other information, those, the CPU, memory, and disk I/O. A lot of us don't have rights to get to that, so you'll have to work with your virtual machine administrator to do that. Have we got any questions yet? Nope. One thing I'll say is that working with this tool has just been so much fun for me. It is just so easy to use. I've just worked with it in between my other work, experimenting and trying to figure out where things are. And it's just, the interface is just so easy. I just love it. And one thing, so what I'd like to recommend for all of you to learn more about this tool is to go to the Redgate Hub, the Redgate Community Hub. That's where you're going to find Simple Talk, as well as a lot of articles. I'm going to click Simple Talk here because I have a shortcut to it. That's where you're going to find lots of information about our products, forums where you can ask questions, as well as Simple Talk. And that's my job, keeping that with fresh content. I'd also like to let you know that I'll be speaking at SQL Bits in February. That I just found out today. If you decide you want to go to SQL Bits and use the code Redgate, you get a discount. We're going to stop now. I'm so happy that you joined me. After a short break where we play some videos, we're going to have the next session, which is Steve and Grant and Richard. And what are they going to be talking about, Steve?
Compliance.
DevOps. So don't miss that one. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you at a SQL Server event.